Table saw is one of those machines that has the potential to hurt you pretty bad. I've had some of my worst injuries, or worst student injuries, on the table saw. The blades are flesh sensing. So if I raise this up, and you guys can't see it from that side, but if I touch this, it will blink red on this side. It says, hey, I know something's wrong, and it would, if I had the machine on right now, it would shut it down. And if the blade was spinning and I touch it, it will actually cause a chunk of aluminum to slam itself into the bottom of the blade and drop the whole thing within like 3/10 of a second, or 1/10 of a second. It's really fast, I can't remember. But it's fast enough that you won't actually potentially cut yourself. There's only a few places where I've had a student get caught with this and actually cut themselves. And both situations where when they were sending something really thin through really fast, and it didn't have a chance to completely drop all the way, and so it stopped the blade, and they actually just ended up running their finger into a stop blade before it dropped down. And so it just broke the skin, but that's it. And that's really nice. You can save your finger that way. The bad news is that a regular blade, a good blade, costs anywhere from 50 to 100 bucks, and the cartridge that's in here costs 80 bucks. So 80 and 60 is 140 bucks that you guys are going to be out if you do something stupid. The reason something goes stupid, I've had it happen 3 different ways. The first one is when a student left something over here and they started cutting their material. So they started cutting this through, and they realized they were going to hit that piece. And so they let go of this one to move that one, and right then they realized, wait a second, now nothing's holding this. It's vibrating in there, and they realized they're probably going to get a kickback. So they reached their hand back really fast and right across the blade. That was the first one. Opened it up like the Red Sea. It was great. Everybody parted out of the way as the red mist went flying. I think I'm getting my stories crossed. Anyway, it all grew back. It was good. It was actually kind of funny because he looks at it and he goes, oh, and then he pulls out his phone and takes a picture of it. I was like, seriously, dude, you need to pass out first, and then you can. Anyway, the next one, a student was cutting a whole bunch of pieces, and they were all the same width, like 1 inch wide. He was just cutting, and he got a little bit in a trance, yeah, sure. And then he grabbed a wider piece and he put it down there, and he didn't even move his hand, just ran his hand right into it. Shunk! And kind of did the same thing that time, except that kid almost passed out on me. That one was more exciting. Thankfully, that one all grew back too. And then the last one, the kid was cutting a piece like this. And as he cut through, that piece was right there, and it just cut through like that. He decided to flick it out of the way, and he took his hand right across there and flicked his hand out of the way. And his hand went rolling across. No, actually, he just cut the end of his finger again. Nothing terribly bad. But the nice thing is that these will stop when you do it. The bad news is you're out 140 bucks, generally speaking. Sometimes we're able to save the blade. We're able to back it out, but a lot of times it chips it and it dulls it, and it's not as good condition. So it just depends on how bad of a hit it gets. Anyway, so that's the really nice thing about the saw stop and the real danger of the table saw. The other danger, besides cutting yourself, is a kickback. And we're going to do a real stupid demonstration. If any of you guys want to move back just a little bit. I'm going to show you the potential of what can happen if you get a board cocked in here a little bit sideways, or if you have a board that gets twisted and catches the back and comes back at you. So I have a piece of wood here, and for the first demonstration I'm just going to drop it on here and we're going to see what happens, see how long it takes for this to react. So if you're pushing, just imagine you're pushing a board through and then it gets caught a little bit sideways right there. So that was a really light piece. Now we're going to get a real heavy piece. This one's going to hurt. And I'm going to keep standing right here just so you can see what happens when you're in the way. Just kidding. So, I was in Tennessee and I was at one of my first jobs. It was in a furniture making shop, and we had a real big 12-inch table saw, so the blade was quite a bit bigger, and it was a 3-phase as well, and the whole thing would rattle because it was out in a barn and it would shake a little bit. And we had this board with all these nails sticking up, so I'd take a big old slab of wood, throw it on the nails, and I'd slide it through there, I'd cut, bring it back, slide it over, do my next cut. And you can probably tell where this story is going. And so I cut a piece, and it had a little sliver that was left over, and without thinking I pulled the big chunk back and I turned around because it was just a little piece of wood, right? It's not very big. Well, because the whole machine was a big old 3-phase 12-inch, it rattled over and it caught right there. And when it caught at the very back, it had a lot of room to move forward, and I turned around just in time to get stuck with this stick. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting on the ground and I'm wearing this stick. It's sticking out of my stomach. And the guy across the shop said, "Hey, this is a stick-up." No, I'm kidding. I actually totally knocked my breath out of me. I couldn't breathe for a little bit, and I'm like, it was a good wake-up call. I didn't even want to use the machine for a little while. My boss didn't want me to use it either, so it was great. But what I found out is that there's a lot of power in a little stick when it's hurled at a great speed. And so the kickbacks and the cuts are usually the dangerous thing on this machine. So those are what we don't want to happen. Alright, so now we're going to go through some of the safety on the machine. The first thing, proper name, this is a table saw. Second thing is the size. All three of these machines are 10-inch. They have a 10-inch blade. And the dado set we'll get to that a little bit later, but a dado set uses a little bit smaller blades, but the actual machine is set up for a 10-inch. The principal use, I'm going to teach you a new word here. The principal use is ripping. I almost said that wrong. Ripping. And that is the principal use, which is ripping means you're cutting with the grain. Turn this sideways, I'm cutting across the grain. Cross-cutting is done on the chop saw. You're cutting across the grain. Ripping is done with it, and that's principally what the table saw is for. There is another use for this. If I loosen this up, I can tip this over, and I can tip this blade all the way to 45 degrees. This is my bevel cuts. So secondary use would be bevel cuts. Also for secondary use, besides bevel cuts, I can also do a dado setup. And a dado setup is when you stack 3 or 4 blades together. You have some chippers in the middle, but you're basically hogging out a big old swath of material, and that's usually for joinery and stuff. You'll be doing that later. But that's another secondary use is D-A-D-O, dado cuts. Secondary cuts is dado cuts. And then one other option on the table saw, which doesn't happen very often, but if I was to put this at an angle and slide this board through, with this lowered obviously, it's supposed to make that noise. If I was to send this through at this angle, it would be cutting a curve or a scallop out of this board. So I can actually cut a curved shape with this. Nobody really thinks about that on the table saw, but if I send this through this direction, I can make a little cool little scallop cut out of there too. Doesn't happen all that much. Alright, type of drive. These are all belt drive. Most of them have 3 belts in them. All these ones here are paddle switches on the front, and they're paddle switches so that you can bump it with your knee when you run into it, or if you're cutting something, you can just reach over with your knee and shut it off, and that's very handy, especially when you got stuff locked in place up here. You can turn this off if something goes south on you. The bad news is it's placed so appropriately that I must admit I've turned it off a lot of times when I'm like mid-cut, because I get a little closer and I'll say, why is the machine shutting? Oh. So you have to watch out. Built-in safety features. First one and most obvious is the table. Don't have the table, it's gonna throw that piece right back to you. It's like holding a piece of board, setting it down into that. You're gonna be wearing it. Next one, and almost as much important, is the fence. Almost as important is the fence, so that you can hold something sturdy as you send it through. If I was to send this through freehand, odds are I'd get about halfway through the cut and then something would swivel one direction or the other. And when it swiveled one direction, it would catch and then throw it at me. So the fence lets you hold it firmly as you send it through. Another built-in safety feature, it's not exactly built in, but it's a miter gauge push stick. And this allows me to hold a piece and cut across there. So a miter gauge is another built-in safety feature. Another built-in safety feature is our dust collection system, DCS. And then it's not really a safety, you don't have to write it down, but we also have our ruler guide here. That allows me to do the precise cuts.